Welcome to the chapel of Robinson College here at the University of Cambridge. This term, we're seeking to hear voices from outside the window, and today we have in mind in particular voices from the world of nature. Exploring our human place in the world in relation to animals, we are delighted to welcome Professor Louise Westling, and we discuss her book, The Logos of the Living World. Louise Westling is Professor Emerita at the University of Oregon, where she teaches both in the English department and the Environmental Studies program. We begin our interview with an excerpt from a psalm written around 1,000 years before the time of Christ, which marvels at the cosmic insignificance of the human species. Louise Westling, a very warm welcome to Robinson College Chapel.
Thank you.
I came across your book over the summer, The Logos of the Living Word, where you're engaging with the voice of the other as it manifests itself in animals. And in modern humanities, the language of the other has come to be very prominent. And you seem to step quite a long way beyond what most people would consider to be other. And so you extend your consideration of the other beyond the voice of humans. The question is, what kind of voice might you expect to hear from and between animals?
Well, I would maybe start by mentioning Timothy Morton's notion that animals are strange strangers, and I really disagree profoundly with that notion, because I've liked animals all my life, and in recent years have had more particular engagements with some of them, but I'm very much impressed by the work of primatologists like Franz de Waal and many of the early ethologists, the Estonian-German biologist Jakob von Uexküll, and the French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who was giving lectures on nature at the Collège de France in the last few years of his life, and who took up this whole question, which has been revived, the question of animals and our relation to them, by Jacques Derrida in his little book of The Animal That Therefore I Am. But the point is that Merleau-Ponty's concept is that we are kindred in a sort of horizontal way because of evolution with all the other creatures. And he's much engaged with Teilhard de Chardin and his notion about evolution and the question of when humans appeared. You can't point to a time, a moment, when suddenly here's a human with, divine mind and all that stuff. So Merleau-Ponty's concept is of a strange kinship that we have with other animals. And my understanding of animals and evolution is that is our true history, and we co-evolved with all the others, and we've been in conversation with them for millions of years. That is, our kind of human seems to have appeared, our modern form of human, in Europe 40 or 50,000 years ago, and displaced the Neanderthals, who were there for 200,000 years or longer before that.
Yeah.
And there have been hominins living in Europe for at least 600,000 years, but not like us. Well, if you think of all of that, and you think of the animals living with the other animals living with those primates, then you realize there have to be understandings. And then in contemporary life, there are all the time. I mean, where I live in the woods on the edge of this town in Oregon, it's huge Douglas firs, or pines as some people call them, and other trees. And there's a wildlife corridor kind of behind my house. Yesterday, a cougar was seen walking up the street, our street, that has maybe 20 houses on it. That's not very safe. And cougars have been known to come into people's yards and eat their eat their pets, you know. Well, that's going on. And yet at the same time, there are deer walking through there. And those deer and cougars are watching each other. And we have wild turkeys who come into our driveway every evening and use it as a ramp to fly up into the fir trees for their roosts at night. So all of these creatures are in relationships with each other's, and we are with them. They watch us. The deer come out when we're not there and eat things. And you know, those are the animal voices, and they don't sound like human voices, but much of our communication isn't in what we call language either, you know, verbal form. It's body, it's gestures, it's eyes, and if you pay attention to other animals, you start seeing that this is going on all the time. One of my dogs is fascinated by a squirrel that runs along our deck and stops on the railing and looks at the dog. And the dog is in the house looking out the window at the squirrel. And they are just fascinated with each other. And the squirrel teases the dog. I mean, things like this happen all the time. Also, I have chickens, and they recognize me and my husband as their family or their friends or something, and I call them. They come running on their funny little legs, but if a stranger comes, they go away. They recognize people, you know. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
So these are not strangers in that
Well, they're
sense.
not very strange, no.
No, it reminds me
We
of
have a
Donald
level.
Rumsfeld's Unknown Unknowns.
Yes, yes,
There is some exchange of knowledge there, by the sound.
absolutely, yes, and it's complex. It's really nuanced.
Have
So,
you followed this documentary, My Octopus Teacher?
yes, yes,
Maybe you
that's
told
a
me about it.
wonderful example. I was going to mention that. Did you see it? Did you like it?
I watched it this afternoon in preparation for talking to you. It was
Good.
beautifully done.
Yes,
Beautifully
it
done.
was. Yes. And that final embrace, if you want to call it that, that the octopus gives that man before it begins to die, that is really astonishing.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a book about octopi that I can't remember the title of right now. It's a popular book in this country, but it talks about how very intelligent those creatures are. They only live 2 or 3 years,
Hmm.
but they reach out to people. They will they taste your arm with their tentacles. That's the word that this writer uses. They they sense, and their brain isn't, as you heard in that documentary, not just in their head, it's throughout their body. And of course, some people say that's true of us too.
I'm sure, yeah. There's an exchange of information through
Hmm. Hmm.
tactile contact. I can't remember where I read it. Something like only 7% of what we communicate exists within pure words.
Yes.
But can I move you on to another question then about the
Yeah.
interspecies relationship? The theoretical question. Could you say something about your experience of working with animals where multi-directional cross-species communication is crucial?
Yes. It's in training my herding dogs to herd sheep. And I never would have done this except I had a very difficult dog. And this was the only way I could think of to try and have some kind of reasonable life with her. And it turned into a fascinating journey, really, because she was impossible. She did not want to cooperate. She is what the dog people call not a biddable dog. She agreed to live with us, and we found an arrangement finally. But she was a wild puppy, and she never was worth herding. In fact, my first real herding teacher was a guy from Perth in Australia who came to an island in Puget Sound in Washington State and brought 4 puppies and of this breed, Australian Kelpies. It's the main working dog of the outback. And he told me, he said, I hate to say this to you, but get rid of the bitch. My dog was a female, and he said, she's no good. Give her somebody you don't like. Well, that was Simon. His name was Simon. Um, but he had one puppy that hadn't been spoken for, and I ended up taking that puppy home. And that is my wonderful Melbourne, who became a champion in herding. And he and I started when he was about a year old. You don't want to start too early because you can ruin the dog. The dog needs to mature cognitively before you put that pressure on. But the good dogs have an innate desire to do this work. It's predation. It's the kinds of things that wolves do. Only with these dogs, it is shaped by your training of them, and the good ones have been bred so that they are not too predatory. But I know of border collies that will kill sheep, and my dog Melbourne was not like that. But
That didn't happen on Babe.
no, it didn't happen. But remember, Babe said that those border collies were wolves,
Oh yes, it's true.
and they are.
Yeah.
I know of border collies that have killed sheep because they were allowed to do it. They weren't constrained by their owners. But my dog Melbourne would never bite anything. And that was one of his problems as a herding dog because he was so considerate of the sheep. These dogs herd ducks and cattle as well as sheep.
One of my previous guests, it reminds me, actually played one of the border collies in Babe.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How wonderful.
I don't know what the chances in that. Miriam Margolyes was the voice of the mother.
Oh,
In
nice.
Babe. Yeah.
Well, it's a wonderful film, and it's not so far off what these dogs actually do. I mean, it was slowed way down. The pig didn't go as fast as a border collie
Right.
or a kelpie. But the thing is, the dog knows already, as you start training, to go around to the other side of the sheep and bring them to you. That's what wolves do when they're working together. They'll choose an animal to kill, and they will work together to bring that animal to what's called the alpha wolf, and then they'll work together to kill it. But the dog handler is the alpha dog,
Right.
and so your dog that you're working with wants to bring you the sheep, and you take that basic instinct and work with it to train the dog to do other things as well, to drive them in a different direction, to pen them, and so on.
So in the wild, then, a wolf pack, for instance, if they're bringing it to the alpha wolf, they would be trained equally not to harm the target.
Yes, they work together. That is their social knowledge. That is I guess the pups learn that from their parents or something.
But of course, you're a different species to the Australian kelpies, and you're communicating with the kelpies and somehow with the sheep. So there are three species.
That's right. Yes.
Interacting here.
But what you have to know is these three species co-evolved together. And dogs have been partnering with people for at least 40,000 years. We know this because the Australian original settlers, the indigenous people, took dogs with them, and they came at least 40,000 years ago. So, and the sheep, people have been herding prey animals for a very long time in various, there are theories about how this happened. But, and then of course there's deliberate breeding to make the prey animals more cooperative and dumber.
But this, at least it says that when you're seeking the voice of animals and you're trying to communicate with animals, this is evidence that you're not just projecting what you think the animals do, because the animals do what you want.
Yes, it has to be a conversation. Yeah. And if you mistreat a kelpie, and this may be true of border collies too, they will not cooperate with you. They will go away. They won't work for you. I've seen this happen. But on the other hand, if you have a relationship of trust, you communicate with each other. When I'm penning with Melbourne, he is on the other side of the sheep, and I'm holding the gate open. It's an 8-foot by 8-foot gate, and the sheep don't want to go in there because it's a trap. But he is watching them, and he's watching me, and he's moving his body just a little bit just so that they won't try to squirt out one side or the other. And we are working together. It is amazing. It is very beautiful. And he's patient, he waits, and ultimately the sheep will go in and I will close the gate. But that's a place where you see it, the cooperation among all three kinds of creature working.
In a very straightforward way. I've sort of bogged you down perhaps in the pragmatic question. So the theoretical
it's fun
dimension.
To talk about. It's too long probably, but.
Well, it barely features in your book, but it was interesting to hear how that is informed by and informs your theory.
I published a paper about that. The zoosemiotics of sheep herding with dogs, I think is the title of it.
Could you say something then about humanity's place in the social order of all species? Because we have the difficulty of human exceptionalism on the one hand, with human inability to climb out of nature on the other hand. On the one hand, humans are special. On the other hand, humans are immersed in whatever nature is. How does that tension affect our self-understanding of our place in the world?
It is a terrible problem. It is a potentially tragic confusion, I would say, which may lead us to destroy the world that we know and ourselves in it. That is how crucial I think it is. Because we are exceptional. Of course, every species is exceptional in its own way. And we have gained a kind of control that allows us to manipulate the world around us in ways that are very nice for us, but many of them are terribly destructive. I mean, we're poisoning the whole planet. I just think about plastic. That's good enough right there. Or to say nothing about poisons in the water. We just learned that the salmon in Puget Sound are dying because of a certain chemical in automobile tires. This has been a mystery for quite a while. Why are the salmon dying? Well, now we know, but are people going to stop driving the cars? No. And so we are part of nature, even though we pretend we're not. Our control and ability to build structures that are comfortable for us and separate us and so on, and to control animals and plants and so on, that has led to this delusion that we're not part of nature, I think. And it's catastrophic because you can't, as you say, you can't crawl out of nature. Each of our bodies is itself a composite of other beings. You know this. Yeah. This has become it's become a very well-known fact now that there are billions of bacteria and viruses involved in the functioning of our bodies. Yeah. We could not digest food. We could not neutralize plant toxins without these friendly helpers. So we're not ever going to get out of nature. And the idea of colonizing Mars, well, good luck. I mean, maybe that people will do it, but it won't be very much fun. It won't be a very rich world. We'd have to take our world with us there. And some science fiction writers have tried to imagine what that would be like, but they can't really imagine anything different from this place. Yeah, so exactly. I just think somehow we have to restore a serious acknowledgement of our place within this larger biosphere and semiosphere, or else we've had it.
Well, this sort of draws me on to the question of some of your philosophical underpinnings, because this is certainly how I've always read Heidegger's notion of thrownness, being sort of hurled into the world, so that we begin in the middle of one gigantic hurricane, and this is what we're caught up in. And you draw on the same tradition that Heidegger draws on, but you go in a different direction.
Well, you see, Merleau-Ponty, because he accepts evolution as our history, would not say that we're thrown. Right. Thrownness suggests it comes from somewhere else, like an asteroid or something.
Okay.
But but I would say we evolved with it, and the world is still emerging and evolving all the time. And you could even say the divine is part of that.
Well, that's the question, I suppose, given that it's easy to forget in these interviews, it's a chapel interview. Um,
Yes,
Given the, even watching my octopus teacher, the overwhelming sense of our devastating finitude almost opens up a window onto transcendence of some form. And I wonder if you
yes,
might have a little to say about that.
yes. Well, I think transcendence is not, I know that the root of the word includes the verb scendere, which means to climb, but I don't think that's necessarily the meaning of the word. It doesn't have to be vertical, it can be horizontal.
Hmm.
It means moving beyond uh, a frame or one's umwelt or uh, a certain understanding, even. And I think that there is meaning and mind everywhere
Hmm.
in life, in the world. And that is a kind of transcendence. And we can be part of it if we are aware of that possibility. Um, I think with Merleau-Ponty, who emphasizes the limitation of our vision, we
Yeah.
can only see part of what's there. And he uses the example of a cube. How do you know it's three-dimensional? How do you know it's a cube? You only see two or maybe three sides of it. And
Yeah.
it's because of your experience, your bodily experience of things and their depth and so on. And that is true of the entire world. We only see a little bit. And, so many other animals have senses that we lack. Bats using echolocation, for instance, or
Hmm.
um, marine mammals using a kind of sonar and communicating whales over hundreds and hundreds of miles with their songs. It's just astonishing. So
Yeah.
that to me is transcendence, and the ability to come to understand and appreciate it is what I think is marvelous. And that octopus documentary shows you one person doing it, and the man and the octopus coming to know each other in a certain way and
Yeah.
transcend their own boundaries in a sense. That's what I think of as transcendence.
I suppose yes, because the despite the engagement with the other, there's a limitation to that, isn't there? That's widely recognised, and whatever is
Yes.
on the far side of that tension between you and the other, I suppose is perhaps how we might understand transcendence. But
Well, and you have to respect that otherness that you cannot ever identify with. You can't have it.
it
I'll
sounds like
give you
late
an
Derrida.
example.
Yeah,
Pardon?
that sounds like late Derrida. Um, yeah,
Well, it might be. You can have some of it, but you can't have all of it.
yeah,
Um, there's a famous primatologist named Sue Savage Rumbaugh. It's a double name, who worked with a bonobo named Kanzi for about 30 years. Kanzi is still alive. He's in his late 30s now, I think. She learned to communicate with him through what she called what did she call a keyboard, and it was two big sheets of um, paper or plastic or something with symbols on it, and he would point to the things, concepts, the words that he wanted to say to her. He understood human language. She could talk to him, and he would res- respond by actions or by saying what he wanted to say.
fascinating.
But something happened. She was trying to create a bicultural realm where bonobo and humans could share culture. Something went wrong, and she was taken away from that project after decades of working with him. And I talked to a scientist from the University of California at Berkeley who knew her and knew of the project. And he said she began to try to become too much of a bonobo, and it was destructive for him. And so she had to be taken away. That was an astonishing kind of revelation to me, because she tried to go too far. Kanzi has this otherness that cannot be violated.
Oh, I see. I see. So trespassing too far.
Yes, yes. And she might have ruined his life in a way by trying to make him too human. It's a strange and terrible thing. And there have been others, horrible things that have happened to primatologists who've tried to have relationships with chimpanzees, for instance. Awful.
No, that's not surprising, is it?
Well, I mean, they raised them in their family with their children, and it turned out that the children started acting like chimpanzees. And then the chimpanzee at a certain age became too strong and violent. So, the experiment had to end. But those are good illustrations of the otherness that has to be preserved.
Trying not to make any link with 3 teenage boys.
Oh, I know about that. Yes.
I suppose the film, the documentary with the octopus concluded with this chap saying, look, the way that he related to the octopus ended up affecting the way that he then relates to other people around him.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
brings us back to the world of politics, where there is language, there is politics, and much of the practice of politics in our generation has consciously or otherwise promoted social disintegration to some extent, with the emergence of identity politics and so on. By taking the other so seriously, might there be implications for our political system? What does it mean to engage well with the other and not to over-identify with the other?
It's a very profound question. I've been through the various stages of the civil rights movement in this country and the feminist movement and so on. And the term identity politics bothers me a lot because it's so pejorative. And yet at the same time, you watch the civil rights movement begin with Martin Luther King and nonviolence. It's a much more complicated picture. It started before him, but that's where it came to a head.
Yeah.
And that was positive up to a point. And then when there was so much violence, white backlash and the police attacks and all of that, then you started getting African-American young men who began the Black Panther movement, and that was going too far for the context. And then the FBI and all the authorities came down on them eventually. But the fact remains that during those times, those of us in English departments were trying to bring African-American writers into the curriculum where they had been marginalized before. That was called identity politics by conservative academics in our field who were trying to resist it. And the same thing happened with feminism. But the result has been very positive in the long run. It's a sort of push and pull. The movement goes to a certain point and hits a resistance that it can't move beyond, but it isn't pushed all the way back. And so in our curriculum, in the canon of readings that we used to have when I was in the English department, African Americans like Toni Morrison are central. And in a Survey of American Literature, you read Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington. You read, the autobiography of Frederick Douglass and so on and so forth. And women writers and people of color are now normal in our canon. That is our culture. And it wouldn't have happened without what's called identity politics. Right. But I think that ultimately we have to emphasize the ground we share and respect each other. And what has been so distressing in the politics of my country in the past few years, I would say, is how dreadfully polarized everything has become. And the politics of hate has become center stage exciting drama on television, in effect. And it has torn this country to pieces. It's really dreadful. We have to, and I think this is true for everything, for all the others. ourselves as humans and the other animals, if we don't respect each other and find a harmonious kind of community, I think there's only disaster ahead. And I know there's no, you know, sweet Walt Disney ending for everything where everybody dances together in the forest. But on the other hand, human beings have been living together for a long time, um, some of the time harmoniously. And I think our very ancient ancestors, much of the time, did live that way. I don't know, maybe we aren't capable as a species of long-term peace. maybe maybe there's this destructive warlike urge that's going to burst out again. I don't know. I hope not. We have too many tools to make it dreadful.
Hmm. But thankfully, and I suppose the work that you're doing is almost disarming some of those tools. It's a counterforce at work, isn't it, where you engage well with the other.
Yes, yes, yes. And remember, I mentioned to you this um, French anthropologist, Philippe Descola,
Yeah.
whose book in English is called Beyond Nature and Culture, and talks about his life with the Achuar people of, I think, Ecuador, or maybe Bolivia. But he said that living with them changed his whole view of the world, because for them, as for many, many indigenous peoples, everything is alive. Everything has a soul and is part of a community of reciprocal responsibility. And they
That,
live in the Amazon forest comfortably with all the others. And that is what allows their success and a peaceful life. I'm sure it's not quite that simple. I'm sure there are conflicts within the community and so on. But
beyond nature and culture, maybe that's the route to hope.
well, in the book he says we can think about these tribal ways of life that predate our culture, but we can't have them. We can't go back there. We have to find something in our own terms that will create that kind of an understanding. And I guess that's partly what I'm trying to do. I and my colleagues in environmental humanities, we are trying to shape new understandings so that uh, a proper recognition of the human place and our interrelationships and responsibilities with all the others will take the fore. That's one reason this forest biologist Suzanne Sinard is so fascinating, because she describes a community of reciprocal uh, cooperation and some conflict and communication under the forest floor in this mycorrhizal network. It's amazing what she has discovered. And it's there. She didn't make it up.
Mm.
And it might be a metaphor for the way we all need to live, the way we do live, whether we know it or not.
That sounds like a great place to finish. I think.
Okay.
Louise Westling, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.